All right. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here again. It seems like it's been a long time since I was here. And today I'm going to talk about the symbolic message, the meaning of the metaphors used by Jesus and others in the Old and New Testaments, talking about the wheat and the chaff. Also, the wheat and the tares. We'll look at the biblical texts and the traditional Christian meanings attributed to them. And then look at the Spiritist point of view, of course. As always, the view taken by Spiritism is a much wider view. And it takes in the vast span of history, not only of our planet, but of the universe. And measuring in millennia rather than merely in years. So we see the passage of time tracing a long process of movements that come to fruition, showing us the remote beginnings, their progress through a dark past, to the present and beyond, to a bright future. So let's begin. First, as I mentioned, references to the wheat and the chaff. They can be found in both the Old and New Testaments. Let's look at some examples from the Old Testament first. And one moment.
Space, try space.
Thank you. All right, so this one. Therefore, as the fire devours the stubble, and the flame consumes the chaff, so their root shall be as rottenness, their blossoms shall go up as dust, because they have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts, and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. So, in this passage, we see the chaff representing those who have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts. In the second passage, we see a linkage between the wheat and he that has my word. The prophet has a dream, let him have his dream. He has my word, let him speak my word faithfully. What is the chaff to the wheat? So we have that. And so we see this linkage. The chaff is bad, the wheat is good, obviously. Moving on, we can go to the New Testament. And this is a passage where John the Baptist is about to baptize Jesus. And he says, his winnowing fork is in his hand. He will thoroughly clear his threshing floor, and he will gather his wheat into the barn. But he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. So all of this about being unworthy, he only baptizes with water. He who comes after me will baptize with fire, the Holy Spirit. And we have these references to the tools, the implements of farming. And of course, the people that Jesus was speaking to in those times, the Jews, were very familiar with these terms. Many of them were farmers themselves, or they had relatives who were farmers. And of course, the Jews of that time were also familiar with the Old Testament, which had a number of references there, as we just mentioned. So just in passing, let me first say that I think one reason that these words, the wheat and the chaff, separating the wheat and the chaff, still have power for Americans is that if you go back a few generations, 3 or 4 generations, in any American family, you're going to find farmers. So we're very familiar with this terminology too. So I think this is why the use of the phrase, separate the wheat from the chaff, in the lyrics of the song by David Crosby still has a lot of power. All you old hippies out there, if there's anybody, well, perhaps not, may remember this song, Almost Cut My Hair. And I used to have hair some time back. And but it was a great song. It had a kind of religious significance to it. A lot of people miss that. They think the hippies were all just drugs and rock and roll. But there was a great, in the beginning of it, there was a movement, a sense of ideals, and people often forget that. In this song, he talks about separating the wheat from the chaff, and this is what he's saying here, is that he needs to gather his thoughts and look for the thoughts that are genuine and loving, and separate those from those which are the product of fear and paranoia, okay? So, looking in the mirror and seeing a police car, okay, it talks about that. But anyway, getting back to the topic. For those of us who are not familiar with farming or unable to riffle through past lives, I remember playing a game of Scrabble once and accusing somebody of doing that. Here are some simple definitions. Threshing and winnowing The process of loosening the chaff from the grains called threshing, traditionally done by milling or pounding, and that separates it from the loose chaff from the grain. Winnowing is done with tossing the grain up into the air, lightly into a blowing wind, and dividing it from the lighter chaff. We have pictures of that here. You see, it looks like an Amish person there. And so some of these things still surviving to this day, and of course in other parts of the world it still goes on. Though there are more modern methods used by most American farmers. So that just gives you a quick definition. So if we look at the chaff, it's considered worthless, something to be thrown away. And the wheat is that which is kept because we perceive it to have value. Okay? And it's an easy leap to using these kinds of words proverbially. It's a proverb. We use this to make many types of comparisons. For instance, literary, music reviews, in our modern times, separating the wheat from the chaff. These critics use this phrase all the time. And of course, politicians will use this phrase as well, assessing the importance of a bill or assessing the issues of the day, separating the wheat from the chaff. And perhaps there's an ulterior motive there. They want to sound biblical, they want to sound godly and get their votes. But anyway, moving on. To get a better picture of the traditional Christian understanding of these words, let's look at the parable of the wheat and the tares. And I'm going to read a passage from Matthew, which is from the King James Bible version. And it goes this way. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? He said to them, An enemy has done this. The servants said to him, Do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, First gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So that's the parable of the wheat and the tares. Afterwards, Jesus gave an explanation of it to his disciples in private. This is a passage from the World English Bible, where the tares are referred to as darnel weeds, which are, until they're mature, very similar to wheat. Once they reach maturity, then you're able to see the difference between the two. So here's the explanation. Jesus sent the multitudes away and went into the house. His disciples came to him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the darnel weeds of the field. He answered them, He who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed, these are the children of the kingdom. So we have that. And the darnel weeds are the children of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. As therefore the darnel weeds are gathered up and burned with fire, so will it be at the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that cause stumbling, and those who do iniquity, and will cast them into the furnace of the fire. There will be weeping and the gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let them hear. And this is always something we as Spiritists touch upon, having ears to hear, eyes to see. It's about the interpretation of the words. So as Spiritists, we would interpret this parable differently. But it must be remembered that Jesus was preaching to people who were not ready to hear the full truth. In fact, he had to reveal more to his disciples. The disciples were more advanced than the regular people. So they would have been overwhelmed. They would have been blinded by too bright a light. And we would disagree, for instance, with the existence of the devil, a creature whose sole purpose for all eternity is to thwart the designs of the Almighty. Okay, that's the parable. The devil sowing tares. Okay, we have a picture there of the devil. We would disagree with that. As Spiritists, we don't believe there is such a creature whose sole purpose in life is to thwart the designs of the Almighty for all eternity. We don't believe in that. We believe there are spirits who are uneducated, spirits who are ignorant, who try to lead us astray, lead us into the suffering that they themselves are experiencing. But we don't believe in a devil. And we would also disagree with the existence of angels. According to the Christian teachings, they were created by God in a higher state of perfection than that of humankind. And as such, they're exempt from the moral struggles to which humanity is subjected. So, of course, we believe in pure spirits, and Jesus as one of them. Pure spirits, there are the passages in the Bible that talk about the angels who make no mistake. Well, the pure spirits are this way for us. But they were once as we are, and this is our belief. On the other hand, in the parable, there's much the Spiritists would agree with, depending on how the words of Jesus are interpreted. Once again, there's evidence that forward-thinking leaders of the church gleaned much that was good from this parable and used it to promote positive change. St. Augustine, for instance, used this parable to urge reform within the hearts of the people and within the church itself. And he wrote this. He said, "O you Christians, the winter will pass away, the summer will come, lo, the harvest will soon be here, the angels will come who can make the separation." So he's still talking about the angels, of course, who cannot make mistakes. "I tell you of a truth, my beloved, even in these high seats there is both wheat and tares, and among the laity there is wheat and tares. Let the good tolerate the bad, let the bad change themselves and imitate the good." So, he's exhorting the people to change. He's calling for reform in the church. He's one of the early church fathers, one of the great pillars of the early church, who recognized that the church at times went astray. And of course, we know it continued to do so. Later on, Martin Luther used the same parable to promote tolerance. He wrote, "What raging and furious people we have been these many years. We have desired to force others to believe. The Turks with the sword, heretics with fire, the Jews with death, and thus outroot the tares by our own power, as if we were the ones who could reign over hearts and spirits and make them pious and right." And he says later that only God is able to make this type of judgment. And when we do this, we can, with one stroke, we commit a double murder upon ourselves, as far as it lies in our power, namely in that we murder the body for time and the soul for eternity. And afterwards, we wish to merit something special from heaven for having done so. So he concludes, although the tares hinder the wheat, yet they make it the more beautiful to behold. And this is truly a beautiful insight into the relationship between the wheat and the tares, or between the wheat and the chaff. What he's saying here in a rather poetic way is that those who follow God's laws will, in spite of the hardships they endure, emerge all the stronger for their efforts. And he's saying that those efforts may actually be aided by the machinations of the chaff, that is, those who turn away from God's law. So, by creating a difficulty, those who turn away create a difficulty for the good. If they triumph in that situation, they come out of it with all the more glory for having done so. So now we've taken a look at the traditional view of Christianity. Let's look at the Spiritist point of view a little bit and see how these insights are amplified in the book On the Way to the Light by the Spirit Emmanuel, psychographed by Chico Xavier. We're given not only the entire sweep of history of our planet, but also some of the history of one of the planets of the Capella system. And Capella is a star that's about 42 light years away from Earth. It states here that one of the planets in the Capella system reached a stage that Earth itself will soon reach. So it says here, many thousands of years ago, Capella, one of the planets, which resembled Earth in many ways, reached the culmination of one of its extraordinary evolutionary cycles. And if you think about it, the world is, our Earth is what, 4.9 billion years old, something like that. But the universe is many billions of years older than that. So it stands to reason that there could be worlds out there that have developed far longer and have reached a far higher stage than we have. And the Spiritism teaches us that, tells us that we on this Earth are one of the more backward planets in the universe. But we too will progress. So at this point in the stage of development of this planet on Capella, there was a separation of the wheat and the chaff. This is what the true meaning of that is. And those who had reached a level of moral progress which was in tune with that world were able to stay. Those who had not needed to go somewhere else. And this points us, of course, to a basic teaching of Spiritism, that of the multiple worlds at various stages of development. So there, we have four major categories. You can look at those. We have primitive worlds, inhabitants at a rudimentary stage, human form, no physical beauty, instincts are not tempered by notions of social grace, goodwill, fairness. Brute force is the rule. Vague intuition of a supreme being. And then we have worlds of trials and purification. That's what our world is. So we have achieved a certain degree of purification, of progress, but the number of vices indicated great moral imperfections. So we're all here for a reason. We all have a lot of work to do. And Earth is that kind of world. Through hard work, suffering, we ascend to happier realms. And some are here for expiation, some for a mission. Some primitive spirits are also here. We can see that if we look around on the Earth. We see the American Indians, for instance, who were in a primitive state. The Europeans came here and basically ran roughshod over the Indians, terrible thing. We see it over in Australia with the Aborigines. We see these native peoples who were in a more primitive state. In Brazil, the Amazon rainforest. So many places in the world where there are still remnants of these primitive peoples. So we have a mixture here, which shows us that just by the very fact that they're here, that this world is not so far advanced as we would like to believe. And then there are regenerative worlds, and that's an intermediate place between worlds. And moving on to that. So between worlds of expiation and worlds of bliss. And this is what Capella, the planet that the Capellans came from, that the people came from, that came to Earth, that planet progressed to that level. And of course, we're told that we will eventually ourselves. So in this kind of a world, there's still hard work, suffering, and so on, but there are places where it's more calm. There isn't so much emotion involved, so it isn't so traumatic as it is here. And they finish some further work on the purification within an atmosphere of calm. And they have a more penetrating comprehension of the future than we do. So, and they can see more clearly that there is a goal, a higher life, future joys. So all of that is there. And of course, finally, highly evolved worlds where the pure spirits are. And of course, everything is relative. What we think of as pure, there are many gradations throughout. In fact, all four stages, there are many levels of gradations. These are simplifications that I'm giving to you. So they've reached a high level, ethical standards, the material holds less sway, the spiritual is stronger, bodies are lighter, more beautiful. Thought is the main cause of movement. Their bodies float above the surface, glide through the air. No wars, no masters, no slaves. And only moral and intellectual superiority determines social rank. So that's the goal, that's what we'd like to get to. So on the planet in the Capella system, millions remained rebellious. And this is what happened. An act of widespread cleansing that banished them from that humanity that had aligned itself with perpetual harmony. So the reason for that, the people that were there who had risen to a certain level needed to move on. They were being hindered by these other spirits, these recalcitrant individuals, these rebellious people who were not in tune with the movement of the planet. The planet itself was evolving. The people on the planet, their evolution drove the evolution of the planet, and there were those who simply were not in tune and had to go somewhere else. So, this is not unlike what has, we can compare this with something that happened here on Earth not long ago. English convicts were sent to Australia. A similar kind of thing there. Convicts were sent there. They came to a country that was inhabited by Aborigines. They brought their European civilization with them. The Capellans, similarly, they came to Earth, brought their higher knowledge to the indigenous peoples of the Earth. And for instance, the Egyptians, the pyramids, the higher knowledge that created the pyramids, which is, people are still struggling today to figure out how they did that. And this was a higher knowledge that came from another world. And of course, many of the Capellans have moved on. The vast majority have moved on. Though some are still here, and because they continue to be stubborn and not willing to change themselves. So this is a major difference, of course, from the biblical understanding that we read earlier about the wheat and the chaff. The chaff would burn in an unquenchable fire. And these were strong, powerful words that were given to a simple people whose understanding would not go much beyond that. Again, because that would overwhelm them, blind them with the light of that truth. So, but we know in Spiritism, we're taught that in God's plan, no one is lost forever. Everyone has the opportunity to serve a useful purpose. And everyone, sooner or later, will reach a world of bliss. So, God's plan, everyone has a chance, second chance, third chance, any chances as you need, and through reincarnation. So finally, the earth will have its own enactment of the wheat and the chaff. Emmanuel tells us in On the Way to the Light that planet Earth is just like that far-off world of Capella. And it will be freed of spirits hardened in evil. The spirits who remain on the planet will be those who have grasped the lesson of love and fraternity under the guidance of Jesus, whose mercy has been the word of life and light from the very beginning. And in the same book, they talk about the two meetings that took place. One was when the earth separated from the sun, and this fiery globe went out into the void, and they were setting the parameters of the earth, setting the growth of life, the various stages that would take place. And the second was when it was decided that the right time had come for Jesus to visit the earth and give his message of love and light. So the spirits remaining on the planet are the ones that have accepted this message, the ones that have embodied this in their hearts and brought about changes in themselves. And this sentiment, of course, is echoed in the words of Genesis. Allan Kardec in chapter 18, "The time has arrived," in the section called "The New Generation." He says, "In order that man shall be happy upon the earth, it's necessary that it be peopled with good spirits, incarnate or discarnate, who desire only good. The time has arrived. The great emigration is being accomplished at this moment. And those who are unworthy will be banished." Again, they would be an obstacle to progress. And they will be replaced by better spirits who will make justice, peace, fraternity rule among them. And we can compare this somewhat to what we do on this earth with people who disrupt our own society now. What do? We send them to prison. The people who commit crime, they will go to prison. Those who are sick go to hospitals. And when they're better, they're released from the hospital. When they have served their time, expiated their guilt, they are let out of the prison and brought back to the general world. But Jesus has a better idea. The people that are actually being sent away, go to a place where they can do good, where they can help others to progress, and participate in that process of progress that all of us are engaged in. So, justice, peace, and fraternity. That's what we're trying to go to. All right, I want to close by saying that this is the true meaning of the word separate the wheat from the chaff. There are many rooms in my Father's house, Jesus said. And we're approaching that time when those who have embraced the lessons contained in the Beatitudes, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the merciful, these will be allowed to stay here on planet Earth, and those who have not will find themselves somewhere else. It will not be angels, however, who will decide our fate, but rather the same pure spirits who presided over the formation of the planet, who decided when Jesus would come to deliver his message. And rather than be fearful of these changes that are coming, let us embrace them. Now, changes are painful. But let us consider the possibility that we're better for it. You know, for instance, if the Dalai Lama had never been forced to come down from the mountains of Tibet, if he had never been forced to flee his country, would he be the same revered person that we know today? Something to think about. And let us embrace the enthusiasm of St. Augustine, who, after stating nothing in nature remains stationary, proclaimed, how grand this idea and how worthy of the magnificence of the Creator. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.